Okay, our next speaker unfortunately was unable to be here because of illness, and we wish him a speedy recovery and may feel better soon. Salvatore Gaspa of the University of Padua. In his stead, his paper will be read by Dan Beckman. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I will read this to the best of my ability, and any mistakes I will take responsibility for. This is by Salvatore Gaspa, Constructing Religious Identities in the Age of Empires, Remarks on the Imperial Religion of the Achaemenids. Recent scholarship has shown that the particular religious situation of the early Achaemenid Empire implies not only updating current knowledge about the interactions between the Iranians and the adjacent millennium-old civilizations of the Near East, it also implies a reconsideration of the methodological approach we follow to study processes of cultural interaction, assimilation, and differentiation. If previous studies on the Achaemenid Persian religion predominantly followed an Indo-European philology-based approach, ongoing research of the last decades has shown the great potential to investigate the cultural content of the imperial religions of the early Achaemenids in light of the rich documentary evidence from the Achaemenid archives, and in that, not less important, of a comparative analysis of the religious traditions of Assyria, Babylonia, and Elam. The presentation will deal with these topics in order to give a contribution to the current scholarly debate on the context of the formation of the early Achaemenid religion from the Mesopotamian and Elite point of view, in particular after a short reconsideration of sources and data used to reconstruct the so-called Achaemenid religion. My present contribution will focus on the possible models of Mesopotamian and Elamite origin adopted by Achaemenid scribes to portray the divine personality and functions of Ahura Mazda. A second part of my paper is specifically concerned with the political and religious processes of construction of imperial identity that was promoted under the Achaemenids, especially in the reign of Darius I. In the framework of this process of cultural construction, we can investigate the specific weight of cultural elements of Mesopotamian and Elamite background, and the Persian use of these elements to configure the new imperial identity. Although analyzing these elements and the Persian cultural synthesis of the Mesopotamian and Elamite royal traditions will not give us a conclusive response to the exact nature of the Achaemenid religion, it will, in any case, help us to contextualize the Persian identity-building process that we see at work in Darius's imperial project. So different sources and different perspectives for reconstructing Achaemenid imperial religion. Current research on the Achaemenid Empire has shown the different pictures that we get as regards to the so-called Achaemenid religion if we use as sources the royal inscriptions or texts of more practical use, such as the administrative text issued by the State Bureau of the Achaemenid state. Ongoing research on the practical documents related to the management of official cults from the Persepolis Fortification Archive have enabled scholars to recalibrate the general view on the so-called Achaemenid religion vis-a-vis the royal and monumental inscriptions. Recalibrating this view implies not only reconstructing various aspects that formed the religious system of the Achaemenids, such as management of temple offerings, cultic personnel, political sponsorship, and control of cults, but also reconsidering the cultural processes that affected the region, Elam, in which Iranians settled and acculturated, as well as those affecting adjacent areas such as Assyria and Babylonia, with which they interacted during the pre-Achaemenid and Achaemenid periods. Among the data provided by documents that originate from this state archive, cult-related administrative accounts inform us about foodstuff allocations to a variety of deities, all of which composed the polytheistic system of the Achaemenid state in the core region of the empire. One is entitled to think that within this framework of state control and sponsorship of temple administration, the two religious communities, that is the Elamite and the Iranian, coexisted but were distinct as far as ethnic-related access to cultic professional roles, hierarchy of offering allocations to the state gods, and royal sponsorship are concerned. On the contrary, as observed by Henkelmann, in the archives we encounter individuals bearing Iranian names and qualified with Iranian cult-based professional designations, such as the case of the Makush, the Magus, who receive foodstuff destined for typical Elamite gods or to both Elamite and Iranian gods. An analogous situation can be seen in those archival documents regarding ritualists bearing the Elamite cult-related titles, Shatin, and who served the god called by the Iranians Ahura Mazda and by the Elamites as Ora Mazda. The redistribution of offerings by the Achaemenid state, of which these archival documents are testimony, is another important point. First of all, it shows that the deities bearing names of clearly Iranian origin are not the exclusive beneficiaries of offerings assigned by the state. In fact, the recipients of these state allocations were a large variety of divine figures of Elamite and Persian origin. The redistribution system concerning foodstuffs for the offerings and the hierarchy of the divine beneficiaries reflects the hierarchy of political power and the social status of the components of the ruling elite, including the temple and ritual staff at the service of the state organization. What is especially worth noting, especially regarding the impact that this evidence has for our knowledge of Achaemenid imperial religion, is that commodities allocated to what, in the light of the royal inscriptions, we presume was the supreme state god of the Achaemenid Empire, namely Ahura Mazda, were actually around a third of that to assign to Humban, the ancient royal god of the Elamites. If the quantitative data of the offering allocations do reflect rank and relevance within the official pantheon, then we should admit that Ahura Mazda was far from being the supreme figure in the Achaemenid Persian religion, as it would imply that the later Zoroastrian tradition and its use in historical research to understand the cultural context of the Achaemenids. Not less importantly, the terminology does not give special emphasis to sacrifices concerning Persian ritualists and the supreme Persian god Ahura Mazda. Consequently, the data provided by these texts does not prove that the Achaemenid state exclusively supported those religious practices that were in accordance with the Persian ruling elite's religion. What they're actually witness to is that the cults and the deities worshipped in the heartland of the empire, namely Fars, as well as the professions related to the performance of cult rituals, were not perceived as exclusive prerogatives of Elamite or Persian religious members. This aspect could simply mean that the religious heritage of the Elamites, who were still living in the Achaemenid period and in full symbiosis with religious practices of the Iranian background, was considered to be Persian in the imperial society of the heartland. That the Elamite religious tradition was considered an integral part of the Persian religious system is not because this system resulted from a policy of tolerance inspired by an illuminated elite, but because it was the result of two concomitant cultural practices: a high degree of mutual acculturation of the Elamites and Iranians, reached after a long period of interactions in the Fars region, and the development of a state culture in terms of imperial culture. One possible criticism to this interpretation, namely the fact that these texts could be used as reliable sources to study Achaemenid religion, is the view that these documents convey is the obvious reflex of the interests and management strategies of the state administrators and scribes, who had no interest to record in such accounts how the rites were performed, which rite belongs to the Elamite religious culture and which to a Persian one, or the theological concepts that structured religious beliefs and practices of the subjects of the empire. And following this view, we would then admit that in the Achaemenid Empire, two parallel, distinct, and unrelated religions, or religious dimensions, existed as far as the core region is concerned. One characterized by an Elamo-Iranian polytheistic system fully recognized by the state, and another one exclusively centered on the supreme Iranian god Ahura Mazda and on the Iranian religious tradition, perhaps a West Iranian precursor of the religious system that developed into the Zoroastrianism of later times. However, this view does not seem to apply perfectly to the cultural situation of the Achaemenids. It is certainly true that these administrative texts reflect the interests and management strategies of the state. In showing an impartial and not ideologized view on the religion of the empire's heartland, these texts also bear testimony of another important point. They reflect the view of the state, a state that did not perceive itself according to ethnic categories such as Elamite or Persian, perhaps more appreciated by modern scholars than ancient scribes. As such, these texts were witness to the empire's institutional perspective on the management of cults that were present in the imperial territory, and, in line with the evidence about direct involvement of the royal authority in cultic affairs of previous Near Eastern polities, is an indication that in the Achaemenid Empire, that maintenance of all the cults was a royal and state affair, and that this state attitude towards a plurality of cults was such because it resulted not only from the perspective of developing the economy of the core region of the empire, but also because it resulted coherently from a specific political and religious vision shared by the ruling elite, the court, and the state administrators. So part 2 is the religious processes at work in the Age of Empires. By the first millennium BC, the Mesopotamian cosmotheistic thought had already developed experienced forms of henotheism within different polytheistic systems. This can be seen especially for the major deities of the Mesopotamian pantheon, who played the role of patrons of the local ruling dynasties and of hypostases of the political projects led by their royal proteges. The henotheistic notion of the divine in Mesopotamia found expression through hymns to the gods and god lists, and reflect the increased centralization of powers in Mesopotamian imperial polities. Attestations of these henotheistic tendencies in the Mesopotamian theological thought may be found in texts as regards both gods and goddesses, and both heads of the pantheon and secondary deities, as witnessed by the cases of Gula, Nanaya, Marduk, Ninurta, Ashur, Anu, and Antu. Understanding the peculiarities of these Near Eastern gods may enable us to better contextualize the traits featuring the divine figure of Ahura Mazda as the supreme imperial god in the Achaemenid Persian discourse. My remarks do not intend to negate the specific Iranian contribution to the formation of the Achaemenid religion, but only to understand the cultural weight of certain traditions in the Achaemenid Persian religion. Recognizing the role of these foreign elements in the formation of the state religion of the Achaemenids is crucial to define the particular historical context in which Achaemenid religion originated and developed. Limiting my remarks to how gods are portrayed in official texts, we can state that also in the portraying the divine figure of Ahura Mazda, the role of scholars, theologians, and scribes of the royal court must have been central, as it was analogous in analogous processes concerning Ashur and Marduk in Assyria and Babylonia, respectively. The adoption of models for the royal political communication was accompanied by the adoption of models in the representation of the royal power and the king's persona in visual art and texts. A parallel adoption also took place as regards concepts of divinity, characterization of hierarchical roles of certain gods, and means of visual and textual representation of deities' personalities, functions, and agency. Specific models of Mesopotamian and Elamite origin were probably adopted by Achaemenid scribes to portray the divine personality and functions of Ahura Mazda, merging traits of his personality with those of the deities of Mesopotamian and Elamite traditions to which the Iranian community had been exposed for a long period. The way Ahura Mazda is depicted through official text and art shows that his personality was shaped by assimilating traits that were peculiar to Near Eastern gods of great antiquity, namely Marduk, Ashur, and Humban. How the Iranian god is described is not the result of the innovative originality of scribes at the service of the royal chancery and of the new faith of the Achaemenids, but reflects scholarly and theological concepts that formed the theology of this deity in the Achaemenid imperial religion, and that were an integral part of a larger process of creation of the state cultural identity. While a discussion on the influences of the divine figures of Marduk, Ashur, and Humban on Ahura Mazda is out of the scope of this talk and will be treated in a more detailed study, on this present occasion I would like to just underline that the connection linking Darius and the supreme Iranian god in the Achaemenid royal discourse reveals the assimilation of the ideological and narrative model at the basis of the Neo-Assyrian royal discourse, according to which a special connection and collaboration linked the Assyrian king and Ashur, or the great gods of the Assyrian Empire. Part 3, Ahura Mazdism and cultural differentiation as strategies in the dynamics of imperial identity building. The political message committed to royal and monumental inscriptions in Achaemenid Persia is centered on the privileged role of Ahura Mazda in connection with the Persian king. Apparently, this is a point of deep divergence between the religion that we can reconstruct from this typology of texts and the one that is witnessed by practical administrative documents, such as the offerings recorded, which were discussed above. One approach to the question is to see the religious vision that emerges from royal narratives as motivated by the new, innovative faith of the Achaemenid political elite, a religion explained by some scholars in terms of Zoroastrianism, Mazdaism, or of a form of religion that was a precursor to Zoroastrianism. This religious vision has been connected by scholars in the light of the Iranian cultural background of Achaemenid Persians, considered alien to and in some ways culturally advanced in comparison to the local Elamite and Near Eastern religious traditions. Following this view, the diverging religious vision in the royal narratives would appear as innovative in comparison with the generalistic vision conveyed by everyday administrative records, limited at registering the offering assignments supplied by the state and at accounting consumption of these offerings by the whole community of divine recipients. Another approach to the question may be proposed considering the divergence that we see in terms of state religion between the religious vision emerging from the administrative texts and that given in royal inscriptions as directly connected with the process of imperial identity building. In other words, also the administrative texts represent a source for reconstructing the state religion of the Achaemenids. While administrative documents simply give us the picture of the religious system of the central region of the empire, characterized by a mixed pantheon of Elamite and Iranian gods, cultic personnel who interact with these two groups of deities, regardless of the Iranian or Elamite origin of their professional roles, and royal festive celebrations aimed at further consolidation of political power of the elite and the cohesion of the imperial society. Royal inscriptions convey a self-description of the political power and the imperialistic project of the Achaemenid elite. To reach this scope, the political message makes use of a narrative pattern, rhetorical and ideological motifs that are a constitutive part of the way the Near Eastern rulers usually presented their deeds and showed legitimacy to rule the state under the support of the divine world. The Ahura Mazda-centered religious discourse of Darius is crucial in creating an imperial political discourse and the representation of the new universal power achieved by the King of Kings. I would prefer to define this henotheistic tendency as Ahura Mazdism instead of using other designations. The ideological religious focus on Ahura Mazda and his special connection with the Achaemenid king, his power and the empire, all creations of the supreme god, in Darius's royal narrative plays a crucial part in the political discourse conveyed by royal monumental inscriptions and show that the Assyrian imperial culture had been deeply absorbed by the Iranian world to such a degree that it represented an important component of the culture of kingship and imperialism of the Achaemenids. The process of creation of a Persian imperial culture reused the language of dominion of Assyria, adapting the rhetorics and the motifs of Neo-Assyrian royal narratives to the political and cultural situation of the early Achaemenid times. Given the intertwined dimensions of politics and religion that characterized royal discourse in the ancient Near Eastern politics, the Achaemenids felt the necessity to connect the unrivaled political position reached by Darius and the event of the foundation of the empire to the action and support of a supreme divine being. This supreme divine being, chosen for the role of the protector of the empire, was not Humban, but a god of Iranian descent who was newly appointed to the rank of the protector of the new king, Darius. The new kingship of Persia, now in the hands of the Achaemenid dynasty, was required to be reflected by a significant change in the Ilamo-Iranian religious system of Fars, establishing a new hierarchical order between the deities, the aim of mirroring, in theological terms, the ascent of the Achaemenid Darius and his political supporters. In the divine figure of this supreme entity and in its special relationship with the ruling emperor, the new Persian elite would have recognized all the main aspects of the Persian dominion on the world and their political identity, from the exclusive support of the god guaranteed to the king, the one chosen by God, to the superiority of the creation of the empire's organization, and to the unrivaled power embodied by the emperor. All of these aspects of this new identity of the Persians would have underlined the superiority of Darius's empire and marked a deep cultural distance, not only in relationship with the old political religious tradition of Islam, but also in terms of ideal competition with glorious past polities, Assyria and Babylonia, of which the Persians considered themselves to be heirs. The latter aspects explains the Achaemenid Persian elite's profound interest in the Assyrian imperial legacy and the acquisition of motifs of Assyrian royal rhetoric and iconography to shape the institution of Persian kingship in terms of universal power. It was thanks to the adoption of this genre of royal monumental inscriptions that Ahura Mazda was raised to the position that would have been expected for Humban. Through the theological and political centrality of Ahura Mazda and his special connection with Darius and the empire, the new Persian elite would have grounded their predestination to rule the world on new foundations based on Iranian-ness. Aware of their emulation of Neo-Assyrian kings, the Achaemenids created a new political identity, showing to contemporaries and posterity to have surpassed the deeds of all past and contemporary rulers, even the achievements of the glorious and heroic Neo-Assyrian kings. The candidate chosen by the new Persians for the role of royal god in the context of the royal discourse was Ahura Mazda. His divine personality was modeled on Humban and Ashur. The process of creation of a new political identity for the Achaemenid elite in the Fars region worked on the level of manifestation of the imperial authority and was not in contradiction with the everyday organization of state cults in Achaemenid Fars, where both Elamite and Iranian ritual practices continued to coexist under the aegis of the unifying Persian imperial religion. The fact that ritualists belonging to the Iranian tradition also served Elamite state gods indicates at least two things: that all the cult-related professional roles were equally recognized and sponsored by the state because they were considered as belonging to the common Persian religious background of the imperial society. And although retaining their traditional professional titles, cult-related professions have probably lost their originary and exclusive connection with a specific ethnic-related milieu. This situation can be explained as the result of a cultural symbiosis of the Elamite and Iranian communities in the period preceding the reign of Darius, a cultural symbiosis involving demographic, social, and political factors, and that was accompanied by the concomitant creation and progressive development of the imperial state organization. In all likelihood, the Elamite and the Iranian cultic organizations were progressively integrated into a unified, larger cultic organization supported by the state. In such a state-controlled system, access to cult-related professions was presumably open to all the members of Elamo-Iranian priestly groups with no relationship to ethnic provenance. It is reasonable to think that the preponderant demographic weight of the Elamo-Iranian component of the society in the Persian Empire's heartland favored this situation. The possibility of social ascent for Elamized members of the Iranian elite in the new multicultural context must have facilitated access to the Elamite traditional cultic organization. At the same time, the exposure of Iranian cult specialists to the Elamite cultic organization allowed the progressive integration of cults of Iranian origin into a common and inclusive state-supported system. It is in these priestly and cult-related milieus that we should seek the context in which the new religious identity, namely the multicultural imperial identity of the Achaemenid state, was created. The process of cultural differentiation that we see at work in the creation of the imperial religious identity by Darius operates in terms of emphasis on Iranian-ness in contrast with the multicultural cultic landscape of the empire's central region, and is characterized by a henotheistic focus on Ahura Mazda instead of showing the plurality of royal tutelary gods at the head of the imperial pantheon. This process was an integral part of the policy of creation of a new imperial identity and is explicitly uttered in Darius's words, as we read in the DSK inscription. Concluding remarks. These observations lead us to further investigate the connections between Achaemenid Persia and the Mesopotamian Elamite cultural legacy in order to better define the context of formation of the Achaemenid imperial religion. Understanding the religious situation that characterized Achaemenid Persia in the light of the archival documents and royal inscriptions has deep implications not only in the field of historical studies on ancient Persia and the Achaemenid dynasty, but also in that of history of religions. What the monumental royal narratives, the royal iconography, and the architectural evidence of the Achaemenid state religion show is not the innovative faith of Darius and of the Achaemenids, but the Persian interpretatio of past state religious traditions in a new and unprecedented scenario of acculturation and of deep assimilation of Mesopotamian and Elamite traditions by Western Iranians. This interpretatio is at the same time the result of assimilation and resemanticization, of past cultural elements, and is witnessed by both the official political discourse of royal narratives and the practical dimension of the state's management of cults, shown by the cult-related administrative records. Ahura Mazda, one of the gods who, according to the administrative offering texts, had already enjoyed a privileged position in the state's Ilamo-Iranian pantheon, although without holding the supreme hierarchical position apparently still assigned to Humban, underwent a profound change in the sphere of political communication of the royal inscriptions. In these texts, the god specializes his function and acts as the new divine patron of the universal state, founded by Darius, and as the one responsible for the emperor's success. In accomplishing this role, the god shows himself to be perfectly in line with the Near Eastern tradition that sees a specific god of the state pantheon raised to the privileged position of royal patron god. This exclusive Ahura Mazda-centered henotheistic tendency and the emphasis of the Iranianness probably worked at the level of the ruling elite and court dimension. The Ahura Mazdism of the ruling elite coexisted with the religious customs of the imperial population in Fars, a context in which the worship of Elamite and Iranian deities and the relevant ritual practices have already merged by the time of Darius in an integrated state religious system socially accepted by the inhabitants of the empire's central region. More importantly, this henotheistic form of the Persian state religion that we find in the royal political discourse of the Achaemenids, and that can be analyzed in the framework of a strategy of cultural differentiation and of imperial identity building, is in no way in contradiction with the multifaceted everyday cultic landscape that we can reconstruct through administrative texts such as the Persepolis tablets. The latter documentary evidence is illustrative of the high degree of full and mutual integration reached by the Elamite and Western Iranian tradition in terms of god worship, ritual professions, and ritual practices within a unified state-supported cultic system. The religious vision conveyed by these texts counterbalance the Ahura Mazdism of royal inscriptions with the evidence of the cultic organization of the state as it worked in everyday practice. The backbone of this vision and mission was the centrality of the new dynasty and the universality of its power. To the new political order established by Darius, the strategy of cultural differentiation centered on Ahura Mazda henotheism and the privileged role of this deity as the royal god and on the common Iranianness of both king and god was felt as the more appropriate means to emphasize the novelty of Darius's imperial project, the centrality of dynastic rituals in the cultic system, and the vast integrated pantheon of the official state religion are other aspects of the Achaemenid religious strategy. In conclusion, both administrative records and ideologically charged texts show that the religious system created by the Achaemenids was fully integrated within the Near Eastern tradition as regards the role of the royal god, the relationship linking the ruler and his god, and the political vision of universal renovation that the foundation of the new state promoted. More specifically, the religious system in question shows a high degree of assimilation of the Persians to the imperial model as elaborated by the Assyrians. This can be seen especially in the figure of Ahura Mazda as the divine protector of the king and empire and as universal God, as well as in the integration of deities of various traditions into a unified imperial pantheon. This system was not simply polytheistic, but polytheistic and imperial. The fact that in royal communication the focus is on Ahura Mazda, while other deities are unnamed and only mentioned in generic and collective terms, all the other gods, is only due to the nature of the political message committed to the royal inscriptions. The foundation of the new empire needed the supervision and protection of a deity that, although already promoted in the age of Darius in everyday religious practices at the rank of royal god along with other deities of the Elamo-Iranian state pantheon, appeared indubitably new in comparison to the gods of the Elamite tradition and without a well-structured personality, specific functions, and theology. All aspects that were peculiar to the tutelary deities of the millennia-old Mesopotamian and Elamite state societies. Accordingly, it seems more plausible to see in the Achaemenid political and religious experience at work in the reign of Darius another version of the process of reinvention of tradition and of creation of the political religious identity promoted by new political elites, a process of which the history of Near Eastern polities, especially of imperial Assyria, offers interesting examples. This process made use of the royal communication and of the language of cultural differentiation to create a new political religious identity. In general terms, the creation of this new identity by the Achaemenid elite can be ascribed to the political tradition of ancient Near Eastern states. But it is in the grammar inherent to imperialism and to how imperialistic projects were expressed in the political religious discourse in the age of empires inaugurated by the Assyrian state that we should seek the roots of the Achaemenid religion.